56%. That was BlackBerry's share of the American smartphone market in 2009. The President of the United States carried one and refused to give it up when he moved into the White House. Wall Street traders thumbed messages on it during meetings. Journalists called it Crackberry. And Webster's dictionary made that its word of the year in 2006. 5 years later, 1%. By 2014, practically gone. By 2016, BlackBerry had stopped making phones entirely. Two CEOs publicly mocked the iPhone in 2007. Inside their own company, engineers had a touchscreen BlackBerry prototype ready. They called it Apple Killer. Leadership froze the project. This is the story of how the most successful smartphone of its era lost everything in less time than it took to build. And then to understand the fall, you have to understand the dominance. BlackBerry started not as a phone, but as a pager. In 1999, a Canadian company called Research in Motion, RIM, built a wireless device that could send and receive corporate email, push notifications, end-to-end encrypted, tied to a server inside the company called BlackBerry Enterprise Server, BES, that gave IT departments total control. For a corporate executive in 2002, this was magic. Email arrived on your hip the second it was sent. You could reply from a taxi. The device weighed less than a calculator. The keyboard, physical, tactile, designed for thumbs, let you type faster than people typed on full laptops. By 2007, RIM had tens of thousands of enterprise customers, banks, law firms, consulting giants, the Department of Defense. The thing about enterprise lock-in is that it compounds. Once your company picks BlackBerry, every executive's email is on a BlackBerry, every assistant has one, every meeting invitation flows through BES. Switching costs become enormous. 8 million users by 2007, going to 80 million by 2012. RIM stock had risen over 25-fold in the 5 years to 2007. Two men ran it. Mike Lazaridis built the technology. The engineer, obsessed with thumb typing efficiency and battery life, Jim Balsillie, ran the business. The salesman, hockey fan, master of carrier negotiations, together they were the most successful Canadian tech duo in history. And in January 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco. By 2008, BlackBerry wasn't just a business device, it was a cultural object. Halle Berry, Madonna, Kim Kardashian carried one, President-elect Barack Obama carried one. And when his Secret Service detail told him he'd have to give it up for security reasons, he refused. The compromise was that the National Security Agency would build him a custom encrypted BlackBerry 8830 special handset, audited by the Pentagon, first sitting US president to carry a smartphone. By the end of 2009, RIM held 56% of the American smartphone market. 56. Not iPhone, not Android, BlackBerry. The addiction was real. Webster's New World College Dictionary named Crackberry its 2006 word of the year. The word combined crack, the cocaine, and berry. It described both the device and the user. Editorial boards wrote about executives sneaking checks at family dinners. Marriage counselors reported couples in therapy because of BlackBerry compulsion. Stanford researchers studied the dopamine loop of pulling the device out of your holster. For RIM, life was a victory parade. Stock price up, market cap over $70 billion at peak. The company built a corporate campus in Waterloo, Ontario, the size of a small university. Lazaridis funded a quantum physics institute. Balsillie tried to buy 3 different National Hockey League teams. The two founders had built something that everyone, from the President of the United States to a Manhattan bond trader, couldn't put down. And then on January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage at Macworld in San Francisco and said the words that would end all of it. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. January 9th, 2007, Macworld, San Francisco. Steve Jobs pulled an aluminum and glass rectangle out of his jeans pocket and changed the smartphone industry forever. No keyboard, no stylus, just a 5-inch piece of glass that responded to your fingers. Inside RIM, the reaction was dismissal. Mike Lazaridis told The Guardian that summer. How much presence does Apple have in business? It's vanishingly small. Vanishingly small. Apple sold $1 billion iPod business, ran the most profitable retail stores per square foot in America, and had a CEO who was about to launch a touchscreen device. and Lazaridis called Apple's enterprise presence vanishingly small. He was technically correct, and historically, he had no idea what was about to come. Jim Balsillie was even more direct. November 2007. As nice as the Apple iPhone is, it poses a real challenge to its users. Try typing a web key on a touchscreen on an Apple iPhone. That's a real challenge. You cannot see what you type. You cannot see what you type. Roughly 250 million people would buy an iPhone over the next 5 years, most of them able to see exactly what they typed. The future of mobile computing was a touchscreen. The two men who built BlackBerry were on stage telling the world it was a fad. In May 2008, Lazaridis went further. The most exciting mobile trend is full QWERTY keyboards. I'm sorry, it really is. I'm not making this up. A year and a half after the iPhone launched, Apple had sold over 13 million units. Google's Android was about to ship. The smartphone market was tilting on its axis. And inside RIM, engineers were not on the same page as leadership. They could see what was coming. 3,000 miles from Lazaridis' keyboard manifesto, a team of RIM engineers were quietly building something different. They called it the Apple Killer. Inside RIM, a team of engineers had been working on a touchscreen prototype since shortly after the iPhone launched. They privately called it AK, Apple Killer. They believed BlackBerry needed a real touchscreen competitor. Not next year, this year. Lazaridis disagreed, that he had a personal philosophy that touchscreens were inferior input devices. He told his team, "I couldn't type on it, and I still can't type on it. A lot of my friends can't type on it." The AK project was deprioritized, engineers were reassigned, the launch window slipped, but the market was screaming for a touchscreen BlackBerry. Carriers, Verizon especially, were demanding one. Verizon was watching AT&T's iPhone exclusivity destroy their subscriber base every quarter. They needed an answer. So RIM rushed. November 2008, RIM shipped the BlackBerry Storm, RIM's first touchscreen device, RIM's first BlackBerry without a physical keyboard. The Storm had a feature called SurePress. The entire glass screen was mounted on a clicking mechanism. You didn't tap the screen, you pressed it down like a button. The idea was to give touchscreen typists the tactile feedback of a real keyboard. Lazaridis loved it. He had personally signed off on the design. The reviews were brutal. Engadget called it just isn't very good. Gizmodo, not quite a perfect Storm, and not what RIM needed. Reviewers complained about software freezes, screen orientation that wouldn't switch, applications that locked up, an operating system not designed for touch. Most damning, the SurePress mechanism, the entire point of the device, was harder to type on than either a real keyboard or a real touchscreen. It was worse than both. Then came the recall. Verizon had bet on the Storm. Verizon had spent over $100 million marketing it. And Verizon discovered, within weeks of launch, that the SurePress mechanism failed, screens cracked, click switches stopped registering, software glitches required hard resets. Verizon replaced nearly every Storm it sold, almost 1 million units. They claimed $500 million in losses. A 2015 book by veteran journalists called Losing the Signal described the BlackBerry Storm as the single biggest disaster in smartphone history. The Apple Killer prototype sat in a drawer. The rushed Storm shipped. RIM's reputation took its first real hit, and the founders kept talking about keyboards. Spotting an incumbent in denial before the market catches on is the most valuable pattern recognition in business. Lazaridis and Balsillie weren't stupid men. They had data, they had engineering talent, they had $1 billion of cash. What they didn't have was a framework for recognizing the moment when their greatest strength, the keyboard moat, became the thing keeping them from the next product. In the community I run, patterns like the one BlackBerry walked into are reverse engineered case by case. Live breakdowns with operators who shipped at companies you've watched fail, frameworks that travel across industries. The 5-minute YouTube version is the trailer. The community is the deep dive. Link in the description below. RIM didn't ignore the threat. RIM panicked. In April 2011, RIM shipped the BlackBerry PlayBook tablet. Company insiders later admitted, "We launched without email. We launched without a calendar app. We launched without contacts, on a tablet, marketed at corporate users with no email." The PlayBook shipped just under 900,000 units in its first 3 quarters, then collapsed. By the end of 2011, RIM was writing off $485 million in unsold PlayBook inventory. In January 2012, the founders were forced out. Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie both stepped down as co-CEOs. They were replaced by Thorsten Heinz, a senior engineer who had been at RIM for 5 years and had quietly disagreed with Lazaridis' keyboard philosophy. Heinz bet the company on a complete platform reset. New operating system, BlackBerry 10, new flagship phone, the Z10, full touchscreen, no keyboard. Launched in January 2013, the reviews were respectable, the hardware was solid, the platform was modern, but it was 6 years too late. In November 2013, Thorsten Heinz was replaced by Chen, who pivoted RIM away from being a phone company, new focus, security software, automotive infotainment, IoT services. BBM was opened up to Android and iOS that same year, but WhatsApp already had 400 million users. Apple's iMessage already shipped on every iPhone. The messaging war was over before BBM showed up. The phone business, the thing that had defined this company, was being quietly euthanized while the rest of the company looked for a way out. By 2014, BlackBerry had 46 million users globally. By 2016, its share of the American smartphone market had fallen below 0.1%. The enterprise lock-in that had been the company's moat, BES servers running in corporate data centers, BBM as the secure default, was being unwound one customer at a time, bank by bank, government agency by government agency. IT departments that had spent a decade building infrastructure around BlackBerry started building it around iPhone and Android instead. September 2016, BlackBerry announced it would no longer design its own phones. The company that had defined the smartphone for a decade was outsourcing the hardware. A Chinese manufacturer, TCL Communication, took over the brand. They shipped a few keyboard phones, the Key 1, the Key 2, to a small enthusiast market. In August 2020, TCL announced it would stop making BlackBerry phones altogether. Final end of hardware. The company continues today as a software and security firm. The phone business, the thing that had built the brand, GMDs, is finished. From 56% to 0 in about a decade. So what actually killed BlackBerry? The easy answer is Apple. The iPhone showed up and a smarter, better, more elegant product won. But that's not the whole story. Apple shipped one model a year. BlackBerry had 100 million customers, billion-dollar enterprise contracts, the President of the United States on its email system, and a brand so addictive it became a dictionary word. Apple alone didn't kill BlackBerry. What killed BlackBerry was its own success. 3 patterns played out, and any one of them, in isolation, might have been survivable. Together, they were fatal. First, after the success became the story. Lazaridis and Balsillie weren't reading the iPhone reviews as warning signals, they were reading them as confirmation that they had won. Vanishingly small, you cannot see what you type. These weren't strategic dismissals, they were victory laps. Second, the moat became the cage. The physical keyboard was BlackBerry's competitive advantage for a decade. By 2008, it was the thing keeping them from building the device the market actually wanted. A company that built its identity on a feature couldn't unbuild that identity to ship the future. Third, each of the engineers were ready, leadership wasn't. The Apple killer prototype existed. Engineers had been begging to build it. The decision to shelve AK wasn't a technical failure, it was a leadership failure. Mike Lazaridis didn't kill the project because the engineering didn't work. He killed it because shipping a touchscreen BlackBerry would cannibalize the keyboard BlackBerry, the device his entire career was built around. The hardest pivot in business is the one that requires admitting that what made you successful is no longer enough. BlackBerry didn't fail to see the iPhone. BlackBerry failed to act on what it saw, because acting would have meant becoming a different company. And the company was so successful that the leadership couldn't imagine why it should change. 56% to 0 in about a decade. BlackBerry didn't lose to Apple, it lost to its own success. The Apple killer prototype sat in a drawer because shipping it would have killed the keyboard. The keyboard was the moat, until the moat became the trap. 2 founders who built one of the great companies of the 21st century couldn't imagine becoming a different company. They mocked the future in interviews while their own engineers were trying to build it. Every empire that falls leaves a warning. BlackBerry's warning is the prototype that wasn't. The next product you don't ship might be the one that saves you. This was Rise and Ruin. Subscribe next time we take apart another empire.